cycle for President of the United States. In our down ballot, it has been the challenges of racial unrest after the death of George Floyd in Minnesota earlier this year has brought about an enormous amount of challenges to corporate America, to governments, to municipalities, across the board. Everybody's been affected in one way or the other. Now, were we prepared for this type of a crisis? I think that there are some organizations that could work fairly seamlessly in this environment. They are few and far between, but we see some organizations that have been able to weather some of these storms. When I'm asked, so what's the real definition of crisis beyond what's in the textbooks or the web? It was when Bob and I were in Iraq in 2006, and we were briefing a 4-star or 3-star general from the UK who was going to be doing the media press tour with Iraqi and US and world press. And we were doing the prep with this gentleman. His name was Lieutenant General Graham Lamb. And before he started his presentation, he told us that this is an unprecedented, difficult situation that the coalition international finds itself in, as it was terrible at that point in Baghdad and beyond. And he said, this is the most complex I've ever seen anything that I've ever been involved in. This is 3-dimensional chess in a dark room right now, and kind of brings to the idea that in crisis communications and in crisis management, you're dealing with this in real time. You can anticipate as much as possible what the challenges are going to be, but you've got to be prepared for multiple things that could happen. And that the other forces that are against your success also have a vote in that process, and that they're working feverishly as possible to upset your endeavor as well. So let's go to the next slide, and we'll look at some tips that you can use to win your equivalent of your challenge to your corporate entity, to your organizations, the nonprofits that you're involved in, or your individual brands. And the one thing that we always say is go directly to the source of where the challenge is, where you can. Ask questions, always give the thoughtful counsel to the decision makers. And that includes in my career of going to Hurricane Katrina, going to New Orleans directly to find out what's going on, going to Iraq to find out what the challenges are, going to New York City to the site of the down towers to find out. A lot of times what we'll try and do is, and what organization will try and do is they'll try and manage the crisis from a bunker somewhere. And sometimes you can do that, or some people within your organization can do that. But unless you have a trusted source there in real time that can give you real analysis of what's happening in a thoughtful and absolute way, you're probably going to be at a disadvantage. The other thing is right. And Bob's going to talk about this as well. There's a lot of people who will say, yes, I have a crisis management plan. It's sitting in a dusty cavern someplace in your office or someplace within your organization. And if you would bring a cloth to wipe it off, you could probably find it. But have you done it? Have you written it? Has it been briefed to your senior leadership and to your executive board, to your board of directors, so that everybody has the buy-in? And that's so important, because even though we might have a plan, has it been operationalized in a way that you can get your CEO and your C-suite and all the members of your organization, so that you want to watch their head go up and down to say, yes, I support this, I'm good to go. And I call that my get out of jail free card, because that's, if your senior management has been briefed on it, they know their role in it, everybody knows their role in that plan. There's a no surprises world, because it's not if a crisis is going to happen, it's when a crisis is going to happen, and are we ready for it? Next is to align our validators. Who are the 50 people within your organization and outside of your organization that know who and what your organization stands for? What are your chief qualities? What are your ethics? What is your trustworthiness? So that when a crisis happens, you're not there on your own little island all by yourself. And have those people so that they know that if something horrific happens, a crisis of some type, whether it's a global health pandemic, or it's corporate malfeasance, or it's something within the supply chain went horribly wrong, or whatever it is within your company or industry or group, make sure that you have those people lined up and that you have a way to get to them immediately if a crisis happens, so that you have validators beyond yourself who can tell your story in a way that is authentic, that is factual, that can get your message across. And then have your message delivered and developed in a way that tells your story effectively. And that has several parts to your message. One is that it has to be factual. In this day of age where it's the growth of the industry of fake news, and it's the world of interference from outside organizations and people and countries that can try and impact what you're saying and what you're doing and add disinformation to it. If your information for what you're saying during your crisis is not 100% factual, bulletproof, it will be hurt immediately. It's got to be relatable. It reaches people in an emotional way, not just a factual way. There's so much of our communication currently. Yes, it's wonderful that it's very factual and it looks good in an opinion column in the local newspaper, but is it emotional that it pulls at your heartstrings? And that's always something that has to be added as well, so that you reach people in a way that they're getting their information. Next slide, please.
Hey, Mark, can I just go back
Yes,
to
sir.
that last slide briefly? And I had a quick question for you, just two things. You know, the boss buying on get out of jail free card, is that something you do on your overall plan ahead of time? I mean, obviously you don't probably have time to get the sign off when there is a crisis.
It's something you want to do beforehand and during a crisis as well. It just has to happen faster. So in 2005 and 6, Bob and I were sent to Iraq several times. The war was going terribly, as we all know at that point. And I was sent in January of 2007 and asked when I came back, okay, put together a plan. So I put together a plan for the White House Chief of Staff. His name was Josh Bolton, who now runs the Business Roundtable in Washington, D.C. And he said, okay, he read over the plan. We went over it. I got his buy-in on it. White House Chief of Staff sent me a note back and emailed the entire senior staff of the White House and said, this is my most important item right now. Mark is the person who is running this. If he needs anything, please get it to him. If he asks you for something, please consider doing it. And with that communication and buy-in from the higher ups, from the Chief of Staff, the President, and others, it allowed me to operate and to get things done. So we didn't get stymied in a bureaucratic wormhole of some type or second guessing. And that was very helpful, Stephen, in the way that we could bring some semblance of peace and security to that region for that time period.
Excellent. Thanks for highlighting that. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Next is what we call no paper tigers. And that means get your local game plan down first. So whatever your local organization is, your local headquarters, your key capability within your company, if you don't have that under control, then you will lose. It's that simple. If you're and that to put it back into that Baghdad perspective, if you don't have the local population secured, you can't have peace. If it's your company, if you don't have your core customer base happy and secure that they're receiving their merchandise or they're receiving their goods or their services, if your organization does not have your employees on board and motivated and communicated to internally in a way that they are getting the messaging that they need and the help and support they need to do their jobs, you will fail. And sometimes we get so far off in another world trying to solve one aspect of our crisis challenge that we're not taking care of the home front. Secondly, next is always be training. So within your strategic crisis management plan, train it, work it, do a tabletop exercise so that everybody knows, from your legal counsel to your senior executives to your CEO to your board of directors to your outside consultants and subcontractors, everybody that plays a part within your crisis scenario knows what they're going to do, what they're needed for, and how quickly they're going to have to react, so that there's no surprises when a crisis happens. I know, as the legal counsel, I have to sign off on things and keep things moving so that we stay out of legal jeopardy, and that we're doing things in a ethical and within the boundaries of the laws of my area. I know if I run the supply chain, here are the challenges I'm going to have. And you want to go through those scenarios. We just did it a couple of weeks ago in Virginia Beach, Virginia, with emergency managers and law enforcement. And we did a tabletop exercise with about 50 emergency managers and law enforcement people of what do you have to work on if there was a shooting in your community, in a school shooting or something like that has happened too often in the United States. And we brought the local people in each community together. What is the mayor going to have to do? What is the police officer, the county sheriff, the superintendent of schools, the clergy, the Parent Teachers Association? How are they all going to have to react in that situation in real time? And then when the cameras show up 10 feet away from the school entrance, how do you handle that situation? What are the parameters? Who's in charge of what? And each of them, in each of these different communities, had a different hierarchy, a different structure, different personality, different size in their community, different political aspects of their communities. And so they each individually had to look at their situation and say, okay, I'm training for a horrific situation to happen in my community. Don't know exactly what it's going to be, but at least we're all aligned and we're all ready, so that there's a situation where we know that we could be immediately put into some form of cohesiveness in the most difficult situation. As there's a crisis going on, you're going to have some successes, and take a moment to honor that and to look at it and see, what did we do well? I've always learned more from what I've screwed up at, but also look at what you did well, and that will help you to improve as you're going through. Next thing is your message. You might have some things that are going to come out that might not be 100% helpful to your overall message. In today's world, that information is going to get out with the internet and social media and disinformation campaigns and cyber theft. People within your organization who are disaffected, to think that it's going to hide someplace on a laptop or disappear into the ozone, likely it's not. So find ways that you can get your information out that might not be completely positive to your organization, and get that out as quickly as you can and under your terms, and then put it in that same message, which is factual and that is helpful, but make sure that you do release that information. If not, it will be released at some point.
Hey, Mark, can you just,
yes, sir.
It seems like that's one of the things that we continually get wrong in companies. It's that trickling of information that not coming clean immediately. So why is it we can say it, but it's so hard for companies to get that right?
So, Stephen, I think one of the challenges is we all think, well, we'll survive this, and That's other people. That's other people that get trapped in these horrific situations. That's not me or my organization. And what we'll say is, no, there's really no difference between your organization and every other organization that shows up in a crisis. And believe it or not, as the way the world works today, and as quick as a news cycle is, you know, when I first started working in media and public affairs, a news cycle was 5 to 6 hours. You know, get back to me before the newspaper goes to bed tonight at 6 o'clock, or the nightly news comes on at 7 p.m. Now it's, I'm going to tweet about this in 15 minutes, get back to me, or else it's just all going and I'll put on that there's no comment from your organization. So it's that understanding of rapid fire of the way it works and social media works, and then the realization that with so many entities out there that are reporting and so many different ways to reach different audiences, we're not, we as our organization are not special in that we'll be able to keep that at bay, whatever that information is. And so it's extraordinarily important that you look at that from a clear-eyed standpoint and say, I know it's going to get out, but I want to put it out on my terms in a way that gets the facts out in a way that can reach my audience to protect my brand, to protect my organization.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. That's a wonderful question. Thank you, sir. Let's go to the next page. So next is there's going to happen when you're in a crisis situation, and I've certainly found it in different instances of an organization saying, well, we don't do that. That's not something that we do internally. And usually it's somewhere within the bureaucracy of your organization. It goes against the way that we usually release information. We release information quarterly, or we don't put our CEO on the phone with a reporter unless we get a list of questions beforehand. There's all sorts of different things that have been brought to my attention in the middle of a crisis where somebody will say, well, that goes against our corporate usual way that we do things. And in the middle of a crisis, realize that there's no such thing as we don't do that. It's how do we do this to survive? One of the examples is when we work with law enforcement organizations, and they all have, many of them have a body cam so that they can record their interactions with the public. At the same time, many people in the public mostly have an iPhone or a Droid where they're taking those same photos and those same videos. And if an interaction occurs that is complicated and that involves illegal situations within the public and a law enforcement officer, the law enforcement entity and their attorney or district attorney or state's attorney will say, I can only release that camera footage in a courtroom. I don't want to release it before that. And what we'll say is, no, you've got to release it right now. And what I'll hear from the municipality is, we don't do that. Well, your community is going to be on fire in a couple of minutes if you don't release that information and put it in the context of what happened in that incursion between a citizen and your law enforcement officer. And we've had to kind of break through those barriers or those bureaucracies, because in the end, it will show you as transparent. It will show you as somebody who's focused on getting information out and being solutions focused and not covering things up. And so within your crisis situation, look at opportunities and don't just cast them aside as, well, because this is not time as usual. Next, so there's a very good book out right now on staff, James Baker, biography on him, and this caught my eye. It was Baker's rule: don't start any fights you cannot win, and win all fights you start. Now, that means that this is not the time in the middle of the crisis to begin flailing and picking fights left and right with your competitors, with media organizations that you might not completely agree with, even though they may have the facts pretty standard and straightforward. This is a time to find out, end of the day, focus like a laser beam on what you're trying to achieve. And don't get thrown into those little rabbit holes that you can't get out of during the middle of a crisis, and it will just drag you down. Next up is plan your agenda for your meetings during your crisis. Prep the meeting beforehand, get the buy-in of everybody, and then ask any questions. If not, we're moving in real time here. There's lives at stake. There is our bottom line, our reputation, everything is at stake. We could sit around and have this the Great Oxford Debate Society, or we could have this as the action group that actually gets things done. So what I will do is in what we've seen in the times of COVID is bring together your decision makers on one Zoom call like this, or a Teams call, or whatever your communication apparatus is. Put an agenda together of here's what we want to accomplish in this time. Prep your decision makers beforehand so that there's not surprises of what's going to be discussed. And then bring everybody to the table. Get the buy-in for what the consensus is, and then go out and do it. So in COVID recently, we've worked with organizations to put the decision makers, and if you have 3 decision makers in your group, put them all onto one email or all onto one webinar so that they can hash it out, especially if you've got something as intense as the coronavirus that is so multifaceted and is so challenging, and get them all on the same onto the same group, and get everybody's buy-in. Of you might not get 100, you're not going to get 100% agreement by call, but get as much buy-in as possible. And then I always say, ask at the end of that webinar, that Teams meeting, what are the questions? Let's hammer this out right now, because as soon as people hit that red leave button, this is not the time to then go, God, I wish I would have brought that up, or I really have a problem with this aspect of one of the decisions. Nope, we got to go, because the time marches on. Next is know your limitations. So within your organization, think about what are you really good at? And we all have things that are our core capabilities. And we have to look before our crisis happens, or even during our crisis. What are we missing to live and to survive this crisis? So in my situation at the National Security Council, I didn't know the intricacies of everything within the United States Pentagon. Nobody does. So I found my dear friend Bob Jensen, who knows everything about how the Pentagon operates. Well, pretty much everything. And he helped me a great deal to figure out, organize, know what the limitations are of working with the military and the defense apparatus, know how to get things done within the bureaucracy. So find people within your group. I think my time is about up, but
go ahead and keep going, Mark. I'll compress mine.
Okay, let's go to the next slide. And so within your apparatus, kind of as we were talking about with Bob and my experiences in Iraq, and with the 3-star British general, the challenge was as we're putting a game plan together, and this is an extreme example, of course, as we're putting a game plan together to find some level of success and peace in a country as war-torn, and with the decisions that were made in the early parts of the Iraq War. We're putting a game plan together. Your enemy is putting a game plan together at the very same time, whoever your enemy is. Your enemy could be the coronavirus. It could be the bureaucracies. It could be it could be your corporate opponents, the people within your market share that are trying to take your market share away. They're trying to drive down your value or your prices, or your take your customers away. Know that that's going on, and be cognizant of that they have a vote in this process. And within that process, know that what are your opponent's weaknesses? How can you work to protect your bottom line your capabilities, and at the same time grow and expand and survive. Next up, if you mess up, admit it. There's something in our corporate culture and some of our political cultures today. Well, I don't ever want to say that I mess up because it'll show weakness. No, we all mess up. It's how you talk about what you did that you could have done better, and then what you're doing to fix it right now. What are you doing? What have you learned from it? What activities have you done to improve on it? That's your way of surviving this process, is knowing that you're a living, breathing, organized organization that is learning from the real-time challenges of our societies. And next up and last up is enjoy this experience. I know it's tough to say, but if you're not an active, aggressive, smart person in this process that is driving it forward in a successful way, people will see that and they'll go, oh, I don't know if I want to listen to him. I don't know if I want to work with her. So at all times, as much as you can, even though we're all human, be that happy warrior for the cause and the group and the organization that you represent. You might shut the door and do a primal scream of terror, but publicly and within your organization, be that person that is focused on success to get things done. And then study, prosper, read what you did right, what you did wrong, do an after action report on it, and live to fight another day. So that's my presentation. Please think about any questions that you have for me. You're going to hear from a much better and smarter strategic communications person, a man who worked for DHS during every hurricane and superstorm and pipeline burst and everything else across the world over the last generation. So I'm going to turn it over to Bob Jensen for his presentation. Thank you very much.
Great. Those are great points, Mark. Go ahead. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. And the points you made, Mark, you and I have put them into practice during many crises, including in war zones and disasters.
Hey, Bob, can you turn your camera on?
Sure. Yeah, I'm having some problems with my camera, as you can see. So I'm going to now talk about the 10-step crisis management roadmap. It's a pretty straightforward one that everyone can do themselves. And you know, I'm sure PR companies don't want me saying, hey, you can do it yourself, but you can. Now, it's always good to get some outside help every now and then. So the COVID campaign has been a big wake-up call for both governments and businesses globally. It's shown us that while many organizations felt they were prepared for crisis, most really weren't as prepared as they thought. After assessing and evaluating many organizations, we found that most were actually unprepared to handle a crisis. Faced with a crisis, many organizations wasted precious time just trying to figure out what to do, and while many did eventually get through the crisis, they did so at great financial and reputational cost. The fact is, most organizations can easily be better prepared for any crisis if they take the right steps, and that's what we'll outline for you right now. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide, please. First, you have to know what the risks and threats are that your organization faces. I can't tell you how many times I talk to companies and they haven't done you know, really comprehensive risk analysis, right? They tend to put their risk management into silos, such as financial, IT, and operational, and when they should be using an enterprise-wide integrated risk management approach. Also, many organizations don't use a 360-degree approach, so they miss out on important external threats like pandemics, supply chain, even local hazards. And putting into place a continuous risk and threat assessment process if you can do so. It should also include media and social media monitoring to identify potential reputational risk. I can't tell how many times I talk to companies and governments that don't really monitor what's being said about them. Mark and I have found that with many sheriff's organizations, they don't monitor social media as they should be. We also have found that many senior officials don't pay enough attention to risk and threat assessments. Thus, the second step. And I'm sure there are people on here who are in their company's risk management sections that are saying, "Yay, this is really important," and you have to figure out how to get your top folks to seriously look at your risk assessments. So risk management needs to be tied closely to organizational strategy development and planning efforts in order for organizations to be better prepared. When I was at the Department of Homeland Security, we conducted extensive risk and threat assessments for the national security of America. We're very good at identifying what the risks are, that part of the risk management process, but we weren't initially very good at tying those known risks and threats to our strategic planning and budget allocations. And with any government, you know that whoever screams loudest gets the most money. But that isn't exactly where we needed to place all that money, frankly, to make sure we were better and safer. So we didn't do as good of a job of executing the how to manage part of risk management. When we changed that and tied budget and strategy to our risk assessments, we made great strides in improving our effectiveness and efficiency in meeting our mission. The third step is one that you can do immediately. Check in to see if you have the right plans in place. I'll provide more details on what the critical plans are right after I finish going through these 10-step roadmap. One of the biggest problems I've seen when working with both companies and countries is that even if they have the right plans, they tend to be put on a shelf and filed away. Mark kind of mentioned this. They're very rarely looked at or reviewed. It's important to review your plans regularly. Are they up to date? Is new information available? Have processes changed? So Mark also spoke about some of the key points in effective crisis communication. One point is to be sure to have a crisis communication plan. This is something that many companies don't have, and I'm going to show you the statistics shortly. And that plan should address all the main risks and threats you've identified in step 1 of this roadmap. It should have holding statements and key issue annexes that identify what the public and your main stakeholders will want to know should a crisis or disaster occur. All right. Some organizations handle the operational side of crisis management well, but fail in their public communication efforts. Next slide. Okay, many times I meet with a client and ask them to show me their critical plans, and it takes them a while to find them. After they do, and they blow the dust off them, I tell them I'm not even going to bother asking the next 2 questions, and that is, do they train their staff to the plans, and do they exercise them regularly? These steps are so important. During crisis, your teams will be responsible for things they might not normally do in their everyday work. So if they don't know what the plans are, and they aren't trained on what they're supposed to do, they won't be very effective. Also, when exercising your plans, it's always a good idea to bring in your outside partners, including local emergency management and first responders, as well as your key suppliers. So for example, do you bring in your fire departments? I mean, do they know the layout of your organization's headquarters? Do they know where the entries and exits are? This is something that many companies just fail to do. The goal of exercising your plans is to identify any issues or gaps and then taking action to fix them and improve the plan. And then the next step is really important, checking your crisis management system. I'm a systems thinker, as Mark knows. I always use this approach in how I manage both large and small teams. And my 40 years of experience gained running teams as large as 2,500, as well as coordinating the on-the-ground strategic communication efforts of large international military coalitions taught me a lot. In specific, I've learned this point. Systems are more important than plans. I know that sounds like heresy, but I can safely say this because, as you'll see later, yes, you need plans, but plans are just one element of the crisis management system. Yet time after time, when I'm asked to work with both public and private sector groups, the main focus is nearly always on producing a plan and key messages, and hardly ever on evaluating the system that will support that plan. I've experienced how a strong system can improve the outcomes of a weak or so-so plan. But even with a strong plan, if the system is weak or incomplete, the outcome will be too. So the larger and more complex the issues are, including when they involve many different organizations or cover a large geographic area, then it is essential to have a strong system in place and one that is working efficiently. Next, be sure to work with your key partners to integrate your plans. You might also learn some things you had not thought about for your own plan. So this is something that many groups that don't do. I don't want to let other people see our plan. But if you're talking about crisis plans, unless there's some proprietary information, you really should be trying to integrate with like your suppliers, like your local first responders. They need to know what it is that you're trying to do. It's always good to learn from other companies' mistakes. Right? There are many studies and articles about crises and lessons learned from them. So try and learn those lessons before you make the same mistakes. And then we get to the final step of reviewing everything at least every other year. I'd recommend more often than that if you can. Next slide, please. So here are the 5 critical steps that every organization should have in place. I'm not going to read them to you. You know what they are. So, and the newest one is a pandemic plan that covers both preparedness and response, including a section on how to get employees back to work safely. So the figures that I show here are taken from several surveys that show what percentage of companies have each type of plan. It's really kind of surprising that even with the popular business continuity plan, not every company has one. And that really surprised me when we looked at the surveys. And fewer still have the other critical plans. But if they did, they would be much better prepared to handle a crisis. I've not yet seen a survey on how many companies have created a pandemic response plan, but I'll bet that a lot are working on them. So now, what are the key elements of a crisis management system?
Hey, Bob, can I
Yes.
just ask you a quick question?
Absolutely.
That's pretty scary that there's only 20% that have a cyber incident response plan. Any
Yes.
thoughts on that?
Yeah, sure. So, and when I say this, so many times, right now, besides COVID, right, the most important threat to businesses and countries besides COVID are cyber attacks, right, and cyber threats. Every country and every company's feeling them. And yet when I talk to many companies and senior officials, they say, oh, that's an IT problem. And I'm saying, no, it's not an IT problem. It's a company problem because they can bring your company down. We've seen in America the ransomware that have shut down certain hospitals, their IT systems, right? And so I asked them, do you have a cyber incident response plan? And they go, yeah, we tell the guys in IT to fix it. I'm like, that's not a response plan. So really, there's a lot of great information out there. And I'm sure your IT guys will say it's not just about resetting the computers or finding the virus and eliminating it. There's a lot more that has to happen. And so right now, many companies are starting to learn that they have to have cyber insurance, right? So again, that's why I don't see enough companies that, especially with the way we rely on technology, they're just not ready. And I think that's a big problem. So, and thanks for that question.
Sure.
Go ahead and go to the next slide. So I call these the 10 Ps. And yep, I had to work really hard to get everything to start with a P, but it's easier to remember than, 4 Ps, 3 Cs, 2 Is, and a D. So anyway, bear with me as I kind of do this here. I'm going to quickly go over each of the elements with some examples. And I have a short article I can send you that gets into more detail. I know we are running out of time, so I want to make sure that we leave plenty of space for questions. So the first 4, policies, plans, processes, and people, are the heart of the system, right? Many organizations have not put in place policies that establish the need for a crisis action team and who's on it. Policies also need to mandate plans and training, for example. Processes are what help the system work. The bigger your team is, the more important written processes are. Having written processes makes it easier to train new staff to review and improve how things are done and to identify and eliminate duplication. Something that I always ask is, what's the process to activate the crisis action team, and who has the authority to do so? What are the processes to ensure critical information gets to the crisis action team? Are there backup systems and processes in place, as well as regular testing of the backup systems? And of course, people, without them, the system is incomplete. The next 4 elements are how you increase the power of your basic 4 elements. So partnerships, especially those that you can get some help from outside, is super important. And no organization can do everything by themselves. Practicing for plans is required. We've been talking about training and doing exercise. So that's all about practicing, making sure everybody kind of knows what's going on. The promotion part of the system, it's important that all members of the organization, as well as key partners and stakeholders, understand what the system is, how it works, and who is responsible for what. Prediction is all about understanding the risks and threats that you've identified that are the risks to your organization. And if you don't know what they are, you can't really develop a plan to handle them. And the plan includes more than just identifying what they are. You don't have to have 100% of all your risks, but you need to know the big ones, right? And then if you know the big ones, you can get ready. So for example, if one of the big risks is that you're on the Gulf Coast and hurricanes happen every year, well, then you know that you have to start getting prepared for that. So that's the prediction part. Also, if you're doing social media monitoring, you start seeing a lot of things coming out bad about your organization, well, you can pretty well predict something bad's going to happen. You need to take some action there. So finally, we have the 2 enhancer elements, prevention and polish. Prevention is what it is. Try and prevent crises whenever you can, whether it's doing mitigation or training, etc. And polish means doing after-action reports and finding ways to make your plans and the system even better. Next slide. So here's our email addresses. Drop us a note if you want the slides or remarks and articles about crisis communication or the crisis management system. I wanted to make sure I left time for questions. So we're open to any questions that you guys have.
Excellent. Thank you, Bob, and thank you, Mark. Great insight, great presentations. And by the way, we will be able to share these with you afterwards. So, and also any other information you gentlemen have to share with our group today. Say, Bob, and maybe also Mark, but you know, when you're doing your crises plan in the organization, you know, what are the merits between, you know, how detailed do you get on a plan? Because you know, you could get so detailed that you never get done with a plan. So what does a playbook look like where you keep it big picture and it's flexible enough to deal with the next thing we didn't think about?
Right. So that's a really great question. And so, for example, let's just like narrow it down to just crisis communication, for example. After 9/11, we found that we didn't really have good processes in place, and we didn't have a national crisis communication strategy for how the U.S. government would work. And so that was one of the first requirements of Homeland Security, is developing what's called the domestic communication strategy. And this is the government's playbook on how we were going to communicate after a major disaster, whether it's another terrorist attack. And of course, it first started with terror attacks. But we said, well, why would we have a different plan for every single thing, right? And so rather than creating the communication strategy for terrorism, communication strategy for hurricanes, communication strategy for whatever, we had one, and it was very general, right? It's a playbook, and it's got templates in it. It's got, you know, here's when things have to happen. Here's when we should be doing calls, holding statements. And these are basically saying, hey, we know that this bad thing just happened. We're working together with our partners to find out what's going on. And we're going to give you information right away, because the public wants to know that the government is aware of what's going on, right? That to maintain public trust and confidence. And so by having this generalized playbook, and it gets better every year, we also then created annexes, and this is what I talked about earlier, the key annex issue annexes. We created annexes for the top 100 things that could happen. And in those annexes, we said, okay, if this happens, what's the public going to be concerned about, right? If it's an anthrax attack, you know, how far spread is it? You know, am I going to get it? You know, is there you know, medical treatment for it? So we figured out what the public is going to want, and then we said, who are the subject matter experts that can speak to that within the U.S. government? And of course, you know, you have to keep updating those every year because some people retire or they move jobs. And then we also had we talked about second and third order effects, right? And so again, the main plan or the main strategy is very general, and then you create annexes that are more specific, but you don't have to have every single answer in there, but you just have to kind of anticipate what people are going to want to know. So if you're doing one for your company, and your company is a big chemical plant, what happens if the chemical plant explodes? People are going to want to know, you know, am I going to die from the fumes? So you need to have those kind of answers already kind of worked out. So hopefully that answered your question there.
So, Stephen, I'd just add quickly that the amount of specificity, it's a little bit like art. You know it when you see it. Some organizations have tried to put so much specificity into it, but they haven't figured out how they're actually going to handle that specificity. So in the Gulf oil spill of 2010 in the Gulf of Mexico, the BP oil spill, they had in their crisis management plan how they were going to protect the walruses of the Gulf of Mexico. And when we looked at the geography and the flora and fauna of the Gulf of Mexico, there are no walruses to protect in the Gulf. What they had done was they thought they were being very helpful in that they took the one that they used for the coast of Alaska. They switched out the words Alaska and put in Gulf of Mexico. And so it's more of put together a plan, make it flexible, and you're going to find out what your challenges are when you actually practice it in a tabletop situation, and you'll think about, okay, what else could happen? And you're going to be able to have that amount of diversity within your group that you can react to the situation that maybe you couldn't predict when you were putting the plan together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and let me add one more thing to that. This is why you have a system, right? Everyone focuses in on the plan too much. But when you have a system, one of the biggest things that you need to look for is who are your people, right? Do you have the right people, the best people who are trained, so that, you know, they're not going to be looking at that plan and saying, well, I'm just going to cut and paste this statement from this plan. You need to have people who are trained so that they can quickly adapt the plan to what the specific issues and situation is. And that's, again, why I say, look, you know, you need to look at the system, because you can have the best plan in the world, but if you have idiots running your public affairs, it's not going to work.
Excellent. Thank you. And by the way, for the audience, if anybody has any questions, raise your hand or put a chat in a message in the chat, and we'll get your question up there. I had another question for either one of you, and that is, you know, COVID. We're in the second wave now. We learned a lot from the first wave, but what were the mistakes you thought that you saw that were made, and how do you think companies, you know, are handling it now, and what should they be looking at going into the, you know, end of the year and into the 2021?
You want to start, Mark, or you want me?
You go, Bob.
Okay, so I'm going to be very specific in the sense that the certain countries that did better in handling COVID used the experience that they already had in place from things like SARS, MERS, et cetera, right? So when you look at like many of the Asian countries, and there's also a cultural aspect there. So in Asia, using face masks is a no-brainer, right? And that's one of the main way, not the only way, but it's one of the main ways of kind of handling the crisis. So they went much more quickly into response mode, much more quickly than Western countries did, definitely more quickly than the United States did. And because they did that, they kept their numbers lower. Now, also look at Australia. Now, I've got a lot of friends in Australia who were super mad about their lockdowns. When you look at their numbers, they're incredibly low, right? Because they said, this is what we need to do to drive the numbers down. So that's the biggest thing. So countries were a little bit slow. Companies, so I was watching things from the WHO and other groups. So we already saw there's already information out in late December, early January. So in January, I put out a tweet that said, countries and companies need to be looking at their pandemic response plans and putting them in place, right? And some companies did, many didn't. So I think when you look at something that could be happening, it doesn't mean that you're going to go into immediate lockdown, but companies should be saying, oh, let's start getting PPE in here. Let's start figuring out how we're going to social distance. Let's do, you know, so we're going through it now, and you're going to see you're seeing this massive second wave. It's not going away. You might as well just prepare for, you know, continuing to deal with this for the next couple of years. So
that's exactly right. So what we saw was organizations that did a good job of integrating their medical advisors and medical teams into their processes did far better at survival during this pandemic, and that looked at the challenges of mental health as well within their internal teams and within the organizations they work with, and that ones that could act independently, or that could find ways, if they were waiting for their state, their local, or their federal government to come in on the white horse and save them, and that's what their holdback was. Many times they did not do particularly well, but it was the ones that could be innovative in that time. So we saw some organizations and groups that did a very good job of figuring out how to transport goods to their customers, how to still produce goods, or to do their core capabilities. But it was usually the ones that could think and innovate and make decisions in a quick basis, using their medical experts and advisors. In some cases, they had to get them They didn't have them on retainer or at their beck and call, but the ones that integrated that as quickly as possible had a better chance of success during the pandemic.
Thanks, Mark. I have a question from the audience. So who from organizations should be creating and maintaining these crisis response plans, and how often should the teams be reviewing them, practicing them? I mean, what's practical? Again, maybe thinking large versus smaller organizations too.
Okay. Well, whether you're a large organization or a small organization, no one department of that organization is going to be able to put together a really effective crisis response plan. And the reason is because they're not going to have the background. So you have to create a crisis action team. You have to bring in representatives from all parts of the organization, right? Because you'd be really surprised that especially the administrative or the logistical side of a business, people in the front office don't really understand it. I mean, they don't understand IT networks, much less the logistics. Someone's taking care of that. So you have to have a whole team come together to really do a good job, because each team is going to have certain things that they know that are going to be a challenge for them. It all has to be addressed there. In terms of how often it should be reviewed, at the very least once a year, right? Just because included in some of those plans will be phone lists, contact lists, right? People retire, people change jobs. So you need to make sure they're all up to date, because you don't want to have a crisis happen and then you're now looking at a 5-year-old phone list and most of the people aren't there, right? And crises don't happen between 9 and 5. They tend to happen like on a weekend, on a holiday, middle of the night, right? So you need to kind of be ready for that. And finally, in terms of training and exercising, it really depends on the organization. So if you're a consulting firm, right, and you don't have a lot of stuff, Mark and I, we don't have manufacturing going on. We don't have a lot of different departments. It's pretty easy, right? The bigger your organization is, the more complex your plan's going to be, and the more training you're going to do, and the more important your exercises will be, right? Because the complexity of different processes, and one of the things that when I work with companies on their exercises, they don't think about what are the interrelationships between processes, right? And that's one thing they don't include in their thinking. So again, I think those exercises, you can do them. They don't have to be big affairs. You can do them around a tabletop. You can probably do them in a half a day, right? And identify key things. I'd probably do them once or twice a year at the least. So, Mark?
I think that's right. At least every year, but more importantly, it's not I just do a tabletop and then we all go home and we go back to our daily lives. But we think about the challenges that are there. And then that tabletop exercise allows us to figure out what's the new dynamic in our society, in our system, what's the new capability, what's the new technology, what's the new thing that we have to look out for. And that just, it gets into a process like you would do anything else on an annual or a twice annual basis that helps to make sure that your company is running effectively.
Good. Well, that was excellent responses there. Appreciate that. And we're getting down to the wire here, so I think we need to kind of round out. Gentlemen, maybe you have a couple parting thoughts. Like what's not on our radar looking forward. What keeps you up at night? Any thoughts on that for each one of you?
I think Bob hit it when he said cyber. And if you think about it, the challenges that we have right now with what we're doing, we're on a webinar right now. We are spending so much more time on our computers. We're conducting business. We're purchasing things. Our children are being educated on computers. There's so much more that we have to be cognizant of to protect ourselves and the entities that we work with and for. And that's our biggest vulnerability right now, because we're all so tied to the computer systems.
Yep, I think that's right. And again, we created this 10-step process. It's not, if you look at it, it's really not that difficult to at least start the journey, right? Actually creating some of these plans is a lot of work, but you can start the journey now. And so we hope that you have all gained something out of this, and it's something you can do today. And for those of you who are looking for a way to, kind of get prepared for the next crisis, if you follow those 10 steps, I think you'll be much better prepared for the next one.
And Stephen, as we depart after this hour, please know that we want to work with the American Chamber, and if there's any follow-up we can do, if there's any further questions, challenges that are out there, you've got our contact information, and we're here to help, because both of us work for government. If there's any way that we can be of assistance to our international partners, to our friends and allies, count us in, because that's part of our service post-government, is how can we help organizations be more successful.
Yep.
Excellent. Thank you for that, and thank you for that offer for the partnership. We'll certainly take you up on that. So with that, let's wrap this up. Again, thank to both of you for joining us. It's been great having you, and I think we've all learned quite a bit on this. So please, we'll share this information with you afterwards, and also the recording with our stakeholders. So again, it's been extremely interesting and a super relevant discussion. Let me also just thank the U.S. Embassy and AJ and Julie for this great opportunity and partnership. So we couldn't have gotten in touch with Bob and Mark without that assistance. So we really appreciate that. So with that, it wraps up what we've got for you today. So thank you all for joining us on a Monday afternoon and a Monday morning for you guys. And have a great week, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you too. Bye.
Hi there. Good job, guys.
Hey, thanks. We really appreciate the opportunity and as I was kidding earlier that being part Danish, I really enjoyed connecting with folks there in Denmark. So.
That's great. That's great. Do you get over here very often?
Not really, but I plan on being there next year. So when I come over, I'll let you know. So I'm looking at visiting Denmark, Norway, Sweden, and Finland. And I'll be meeting with their emergency management, the civil protection and emergency management agencies within the government. And maybe I'll drag Mark over if he wants to come out.
Well, then we'll certainly love to have you for an OSAC meeting if you can make time.
Yeah, we've spoken to OSAC at other times. So been really, those have been some really great discussions, because we could, especially when we're in person, we can be a little more, sometimes a little more open than we have been. But again, we'll stay in touch, and if there's other things we could do, in fact, happy to talk to OSAC virtually if that's something that might be helpful. But keep in mind, again, we're going to try and get over there. At least I'll try and get over there next summer. So
Yeah, that would be great. Let's
Appreciate
hope things clear up enough so that we can put that on the calendar.
exactly.
So that you can actually travel, yeah.
We've always got the option to give you special permission. As long as you have a critical errand to run, you can get into Denmark. So.
Oh, well, there you go.
Yeah.
I wouldn't mind doing that. Maybe I'll ask my friends and colleagues over there at the embassy to see if that's something they might want to do, because it would involve meeting with the government of Denmark. So
Yeah. No, I'm sure that would be a good opportunity. So yes, the door is not completely closed.
Yeah. Well, again, this has been great fun, and we're glad that you're going to post the slides and all. And again, anyone who wants to reach out, we're happy to talk to them. So
Good.
We'll also put that in the follow-up.
Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Well, thanks,
Good.
you guys.
Gentlemen, I guess we can kind of sign out now. So have a great morning. Thank you for your time, and thank you for staying on just a little bit longer to just round it out. So I think most of our people are off. So take care.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
Thanks,
Next time.
everybody. Have a great
Bye.
year.
You too.
Bye.
Bye now.